Welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex Lord. Great show for you today. Ron Gant is going to be joining us to talk about the Braves. We're going to talk about Ohtani. We're going to talk about Acuna. We're going to talk about college football. We're going to talk about the Falcons. We got the whole 9 yards. But I want to start off with a little Braves talk before we get to Ron Gant, and it's basically surrounded the Dodgers. They have a very similar path over the last two seasons of the Braves. Top seed, get knocked out in the first round. The way they've reacted, though, has obviously been much different. They go out and get Ohtani. We now hear they're in on Glasnow and Margot and Yamamoto, and they're definitely going to keep adding. They are going to be the most aggressive team this offseason. I don't think there's any doubt about that, especially with the way Ohtani's contract is set up, which we talked about yesterday. The Braves, on the other hand, everything's kind of been smaller. We're talking about Kelenic. We're talking about relievers. We still don't know about the rotation. Maybe they add to it. Maybe they don't. I understand why fans are frustrated, but I do want to remind people, one, that the Dodgers have more money than everyone else. And two, they've actually been cutting salary over the last couple of seasons for this moment, for this offseason, for Ohtani, for, Yamamoto, for those guys. This has been something that's been planned multiple years in the future. The Braves have not been doing that. And I think this is something you might see the Braves do in the future. And I know that pisses a lot of Braves fans off because they haven't seen it happen yet. And they're like, oh, you're just saying that because it's always next year. It's always next year. We're going to spend next year. Well, the Braves have the highest payroll they've ever had, a luxury tax payroll of over $260 million, by far the highest. It's a top 5 payroll. They are not cheap. And then when you look at the construction of this roster, you're talking about Marcell Ozuna, Charlie Morton, Max Fried, a bunch of the money they took on from the Kelenic trade. That's all off the books next year. So they're going to have a lot of money to spend. So look for the Braves to be a lot more aggressive in free agency next year, especially since we see this payroll continue to rise and rise and rise. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it's in the cards. I still hope they add a reliever, but I wouldn't get too down on this because at the end of the day, the Dodgers needed a lot more help than the Braves did. They didn't have this core to build around. And they weren't in nearly as good of a position to compete this year. They still aren't right now with the way they're currently constructed. They need not just one starting pitcher. Glasnow's not going to be enough. They need Yamamoto and Glasnow just to be on that same level. So these were not similar situations coming into the offseason.
Yeah, I think what's important there is the core, the construct, the root of both of these teams are built very differently. The Braves are never going to have an offseason like the Dodgers are going to have this offseason where they're signing blockbuster names. They're trading for blockbuster names. I'm not saying that couldn't happen for the Braves, but it's unlikely just because of the construction of the roster, to your point, that there's very small. There's not a lot of room to upgrade for the Braves. Obviously, coming into the offseason, there was 3 main things that everybody knew needed to be addressed. Left field, the bullpen, and the rotation to a certain extent. When they brought back Charlie Morton, it kind of negated that a little bit. Now, they go out, they sign Ronaldo Lopez, who could do both in terms of the bullpen and the rotation. They went out and get Kelenic, like you said. So for the most part, they filled the biggest voids. Now, that's not to say they weren't trying to still reach another level, because we do know that they went after Aaron Nola. So it wasn't a money thing. It was a value thing. It was a right guy, right time type thing. Like you said, the Dodgers were gearing up for this Ohtani go. So I think that, Braves fans who are always just the sky is falling, my team never spends money, why is my team not doing this? Sometimes, most times, the best moves are the ones you don't make. Alex Anthopoulos is never going to be backed into a corner and make a move because his rivals, say the Dodgers, are making moves. The Braves are gearing up for something bigger. We're not going to, respond to an Ohtani signing. Alex Anthopoulos is going to make a signing or make an acquisition, period, because it makes sense for the Braves today and possibly the future. And the core of this team is always going to limit the number or, the splash signings, because we already have everybody. There's very little room. And let's just say Kelenic works out and he's the left fielder of the future. There's virtually no place position-wise the Braves can upgrade outside of shortstop, and that's Orlando Arcia. So the only thing the Braves can really do is upgrade the pitching staff, particularly the rotation, because we just saw the bullpen, he overkilled it in my opinion, and I love it. That's what I wanted. And the value just wasn't there in terms of the rotation. Where was he? What is he going to do?
Yeah, I mean, and you look at this Kellenic deal, you get him through 2028. If he works out and he is the left fielder of the future, you now have an affordable left fielder through the year 2028, and you really have a lot of flexibility with your payroll. Now, the Braves this year did eat a lot of money to do that. They took on the Marco Gonzalez. They took on the Evan White. They traded Evan White for Max Stassi, who they basically ate all that salary and sent him to Chicago. So they're taking on a lot of money this year that will be gone next year. When you look at that and then you imagine that Kellenic's the guy in left field, you look at this roster, the lineup's pretty much set for the foreseeable future, 4 or 5 years. Listen, sometimes you just have to punt. And I know that sucks to hear, but sometimes the best move to do is punt and wait until next year when you have $100 million extra to spend. Maybe you like the free agent pitchers a little bit more. Maybe you want to re-sign Max Fried. Maybe you want to see if his injury, from last year was legit. You don't want to rush into an extension with him because at the end of the day, you end up going for it right here. Let's say you go for it and you get a guy like Blake Snell and he doesn't really pan out. Well, now you can't go out and get a guy next year, or that limits you next year. Maybe it prevents you from signing Max Fried next year. Maybe it prevents you to make a plethora of other moves that you want to make. And I know it sucks because the Braves haven't made that huge free agent signing, but just think about the 2015 when they went out and did that with BJ Upton. A year later, or 2014 or whatever it was, 13, I don't know. A year or two later, they're now, dismembering the team. And I don't think that would happen with this core because it's that talented, but it's just a reminder that sometimes the best move is to punt and not go all in if you don't love the guy. I think they loved Aaron Nola. I don't think there's anyone else that they necessarily loved. And they're saying, hey, we're good enough to compete. We're good enough to win a championship. If our lineup shows up, unlike it has the last 2 postseasons, we are definitely good enough to win a championship. And that's good enough for Alex Anthopoulos to say, hey, we can go into this year like this. If we have to make tweaks at the deadline, we still can. And then next year, we're still going to be just as good. And there's going to be a ton of other moves. And we got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 more opportunities to win a championship. And we didn't put ourselves in a bind by making a signing that we weren't necessarily comfortable with.
Yeah, it's not apples to apples, but I kind of try and translate to sports, different leagues, because, maybe some of our listeners aren't too keen on baseball, but think of it like a bad quarterback contract. The New York Giants are kind of in a pickle with Daniel Jones. You pay an average guy good money, and now you're in a bind. You don't want to be in that bind. You want to remain flexible. You want to remain light and able to do things when the opportunity approaches. Let's say somebody becomes available at the trade deadline and the Braves have to, inherit a bunch of money. They maybe wouldn't be able to do that had they, jumped the gun and signed somebody who, maybe they did overpay. So I do like that analogy in this situation. And your point remains, punting isn't the worst thing in the world when you are already this good. Like this team as currently constructed can win a World Series.
Yeah, and I think we're underselling it. This team as currently constructed is still the best team in baseball. Like, I don't care what the Dodgers did because, go look at FanGraphs pitching war. We are number 2. So for all this talk that we don't have any pitching, we're second. And yes, other moves are going to be made, and maybe the Braves turn out 7th or 6th or 5th, but they're going to be up there in the top 10. That pitching staff, yes, it could get a little bit better, and maybe we still do make a smaller move or something like that. But that pitching staff is still good enough with this lineup. If they are hitting in October, I have to remind you, they did not hit in October the past 2 seasons. If that lineup shows up, this is definitely this is a better pitching staff than we had in 2021 than we won. So I understand, but I will say one last thing, and that's if the Braves don't make big moves to add to their rotation next year, I'll be absolutely shocked. And I know people are going to be like, oh, you're just, I'm telling you, if they do not make huge moves, huge, not just like a little signings, Ronaldo Lopez and stuff like that. If they don't make absolutely blockbuster moves, re-signing Max Fried, bringing a Max Fried replacement, because you're talking about Fried and Charlie Morton leaving. Now that opens a lot of payroll, but now you got to fill those 2 spots. If they don't make blockbuster signings next offseason when they have more flexibility than they did this year, I will be absolutely shocked. And I will put anything on it. They will make huge moves coming up this next offseason.
Yeah, I think I'm not going to put my money where your mouth is, but you obviously are. I think that, the Braves aren't done wheeling and dealing maybe this season, but next offseason, Anthopoulos has shown an ability to find value where nobody else can. And he's going to continue to do that. He's just not going to sit on his hands. If he can upgrade the roster by 1%, he's going to do such. And with all the salary coming up, that 1% equates to much more when you've got dollars in the bank that you can use at your disposal.
Yeah, and I just think it really comes down to just being comfortable. They said they would spin for the right guy. I think they found the right guy in Aaron Nola. Obviously, things didn't work out. He wanted to remain in Philly. No hate towards him. I hope we kick his butt next time we play him. But I think when they get the right guy, they will spin. Coming up after the break, Ron Gant is going to join us to talk about the Braves, Acuna, Ohtani, the whole nine.